with the ratification of the Constitution, the new government now needed a new leader. And George Washington was a natural choice for a lot of people in the country. He was well respected, he was trustworthy. People trusted him, they liked him. He was seen as a war hero because he leading the revolution. He was voted president of the Continental Convention when they first met to discuss the Constitution. So he was a natural leader, and many people wanted him to be the first president. George Washington himself had actually kind of set out to retire. He was going to go back to Virginia and retire, but he was convinced to come out of his retirement, and he was unanimously then voted in to be the first president. Everything that George and his wife Martha did in office set certain precedents, right, or examples of how things kind of worked in the government. Even from simple things as to the fact that the president is referred to as Mr. President as opposed to something else, not Your Highness or Your Excellency. So even from small things like that to the role of the First Lady, that Martha Washington became like hostess to everything, to the way that they organized, the way that the executive branch and the government was going to run on a day-to-day basis, all of these were set with this first office. And so all of the routines and kind of things that were set in place during the term that George Washington was president set these examples for the future presidents and the future terms of office of how things were going to work. Now, as per the Constitution and the way that things were written, right, presidents were voted by an Electoral College, which meant that each state appointed a certain number of electors that were each based on the number of congressmen that they had in Congress. Electors then were responsible for electing the president. So technically, electors don't have to vote the way that the people vote. Most of the time, as we've seen, the electors will always vote with the majority of the people within the state, but that's not technically the case. The Electoral College was set in place because of the fact that the delegates didn't necessarily trust the vote of the majority of the people, because the majority of the people were thought to be uneducated because most of them were relatively poor and didn't have a full education. And that's why the Electoral College was first set in place, was to kind of buffer the masses from voting just in case the delegates or the electors thought that they were voting incorrectly. As per the Constitution at that time, George Washington was elected president because he got all of the electoral votes, and then the person who was runner-up, who got the second number of votes, was actually then automatically named vice president. That's the way that it originally showed in the Constitution. Then later on, that's going to be amended, and that's going to change. But initially, the person with the second amount of votes would then automatically become vice president. In this case, that was John Adams. So George Washington was voted president, and John Adams became vice president, and they were both then inaugurated into office in New York City, which actually served as the first temporary capital for the United States. Now, in terms of Martha Washington, right, Martha Washington, when she first came into office, kind of set her own precedent as the role of the First Lady and what she was going to do. Overall, Martha Washington served more as kind of hostess with these big social engagements and planning parties and dinner parties for delegates and ambassadors coming in. So she really served more as kind of a social hostess for important events. Some women within the country and very outspoken women like Abigail Adams, who was John Adams's wife, and author Judith Sargent Murray kind of felt that the role of Martha Washington could have been more important. Martha Washington could have taken on a greater role within the nation rather than just playing kind of hostess and housewife. And this is where the term Republican motherhood comes in, where women can play an important role in teaching their children to be good citizens. So it's not just the housewife that's at home taking care of the family, but it's actually the fact that the mother plays a very important role in the development of the children to be citizens who can then actually rule the country. At that time, it wouldn't have been probable that women would have taken a very active role in kind of the political atmosphere or owning a business, but they hoped that somehow women would then, it would open up the avenue for women, if they were viewed as to be an important part of educating children to be good citizens, it would mean that they themselves would have to receive an education. So some hope that with this idea of Republican motherhood, more women would then be able to receive an education, because that wasn't really the norm. Very few families provided very much formal education for their daughters. Right? It was mostly for the sons. So with the hope of Republican motherhood and this kind of idea that women played a vital role in society, it might have opened up the idea of more women being educated throughout the country. Most women in the early republic really managed their households. They worked hard inside the house or outside the house and the farm to be able to support their family. So women always did have a very full day-to-day life, in just trying to manage their house and home and manage the family, which for the most part pretty much went unnoticed by everyone else, but they definitely were very active members of society.